Hello Okita One Talk, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Suisuki. Coming up.
For many of you, it changed the course of your life, and for that, the government must take responsibility.
An apology that's been called empty and cold. Also,
so in terms of my journey, I'm now trying to relearn Pidgin.
It's Papua New Guinea Language Week, and later on, day one done and dusted for COP29. Survivors of abuse in faith and state-based institutions want meaningful redress that reinstates the cultural identity of survivors, following the New Zealand government's formal apology. Since 1950, hundreds of thousands of children, young people and adults have been abused in Aotearoa. The majority of them were Māori or Pasifika, many were deaf and disabled. They were stripped of their personhood, heritage and culture. Thousands of survivors and their whānau across the country watched on, following decades of waiting to hear the government of New Zealand take accountability for the abuse and harm which has impacted generations of people. Alicia Foon has more.
Abused, tortured and stripped of their identity, culture and language in state care. Survivors want real action alongside an independent redress system. In Wellington, as survivors watched the Prime Minister's apology, many sat with their heads in their hands, sobbing. Others shouted out in anger and frustration. Between 1950 and 1999, an estimated 200,000 children, young people and vulnerable adults were abused and many more neglected. At least 80% of survivors were Māori. Shannon Martin from Masterton was abused in state care from age 3. He says it propelled him into a life of crime, perpetuating cycles of trauma until he had the courage to heal and face it. Mātua Martin hopes a redress system, which the government has proposed to set up by next year, takes cultural heritage into account.
Our cultural identity needs to be acknowledged on this healing journey. It does. My healing journey was hard because I was put back in front of people that look like my abuser. And they're telling you to sit there and give them these answers, and it was the hardest bloody journey of my life.
Francis Tangaloa suffered sexual and emotional abuse by a Marist brother during the 1970s and has been waiting 22 years for a meaningful apology.
I would love to be able to have an ifunga, which is extending forgiveness, but also the perpetrators, which would be the church and state, coming and asking for forgiveness through the ifunga traditional way of reconciliation.
She says cultural heritage must be honoured for healing to happen in a way that's meaningful to each person.
It has to have a Pacifica pathway and a Te Ao Māori pathway to be able to address the cultural concerns in a cultural, appropriate and meaningful way. Otherwise, for Pacifica or for Māori, it's not meaningful if they're not putting it into the context of the culture.
Jim Goodwin is a survivor of faith-based abuse at Christ College. He told RNZ as a Pākehā, he recognises the system failed Pacific and Māori survivors. A wrong, he says, must be put right.
The system that these people were put in was a Pākehā system. It didn't even work for Pākehā. And Māori and Pacifica people were taken away from their whānau, away from their culture, and put in a very bad version of Pākehā culture. So part of the recovery for those groups of people is reconnection with their culture and reconnection with their whānau.
Mātua Martin says the government has over 100 recommendations to implement, but he'd like more funding for Māori and Pacific Health Services.
So that we're able to heal our own. A Pākehā trying to heal the Māori, it doesn't seem to work. And there's a good reflection of our history, shows that. I just think, Māori for Māori and Pacifica for Pacifica, because we all know each other. Hey, we know each other's maunga, waka, our Pākehā whānau team, eh? And that's okay, it's not their fault. But get on top of it.
Survivors say that without action, the government's apology is empty.
It's Papua New Guinea Pidgin Language Week, and the theme for 2024 is Lukautum Strongim na Kirapim Tokples na Pasim Blo Tubuna, which translates to preserve, revitalize, and promote our language and culture. Papua New Guinea is the largest Pacific nation, home to nearly 11 million people, and covering an area 1.7 times larger than New Zealand. Victoria Ongolea, a PhD student at the University of Auckland's Business School, hails from Koge in Cebu Province. Ongolea reflects on her own personal journey and is pleased that Pidgin has been added to the Pacific Language Week celebrations, but she believes more needs to be done. She spoke with Grace Viva'ai.
So I was born in Papua New Guinea, and then when I was 8 years old, we moved to Tonga. So my mom is from Papua New Guinea, from the Simbu province in the Highlands. I was born there, and then we moved to Tonga when I was 8 years old. Growing up in Papua New Guinea, I spoke Pidgin. So Pidgin is a language that is spoken throughout Papua New Guinea.
You moved to Tonga at a very young age. How has the journey been so far learning the language? And what steps are you taking to know more of your culture, especially living here in the diaspora?
Transitioning into a new environment, into a new habitat, a new ecosystem, I had to learn Tongan language and the Tongan culture. So I was raised in Tonga, and my proficiency of speaking Pidgin slowly faded away. So in terms of my journey, I'm now trying to relearn Pidgin, and because most of it has faded away as I've mainly been in Tonga and until 2015 when I moved to New Zealand. I realized that, like I've said, there's other students on campus. So what I'm trying to do now is connecting with them. I'm involving myself in that area, so that I can, learn that part of me which I felt like has been lost for quite a while since I was 8 years old, which it has been absent from my life.
It's Papua New Guinea Pidgin Language Week here in Aotearoa, and it's the first time it's been added to the language weeks. How do you feel as a Papua New Guinean celebrating this here in Aotearoa for the first time?
In terms of having the language weeks, they are good, but I feel like those are the starting point. There should be more implementation into it, and at the end of the day, it's not just a once a year language week. It should be something that is implemented throughout the whole year, because it is slowly fading away every year. And it's not only the Pidgin language; it's all indigenous languages are fading, and I think the indigenous languages are in danger. So. But they're important to hold on to. I just want to thank Aotearoa New Zealand for opening up this platform to celebrate our language weeks, regardless of what nationality we are, that we are welcome to the tangata whenua of this land for not only opening up their doors for us to be here as tangata tiriti, but also to have a space to celebrate our own culture on their land.
The UN Climate Change Conference, COP29 in Azerbaijan, has finished its first day. The Director of Climate Change for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Programme, Tangaloa Cooper, told Caleb Fotheringham what the Pacific priorities are for the week ahead.
This COP has been dubbed widely as the finance COP, and the importance of that really is whether countries can agree on a new climate finance target called the New Collective Qualified Goal for mitigation, for adaptation, for loss and damage. And so the Pacific's here really to negotiate and ensuring that there is a global commitment to increase finance, and that's why it's been dubbed the Finance COP, because there's a lot riding on this COP, particularly in just real ramped up finance. And the previous 100 billion has to be revisited, particularly in the NCQG, because now countries, especially developing countries, are talking about, can't talk in billions anymore, we need to talk in trillions, because the cost of adaptation, loss and damage mitigation, is very high. And really, for these talks here at COP29 to be meaningful, the Pacific wants to come away with agreement on climate finance, on real increase in finance, commitment to that finance increase, commitment to finance flow, making it more accessible for small developing countries like the Pacific.
Outside of climate finance, what are the Pacific priorities?
The Pacific has 4 headline messages, and those are that we need to stick to the 1.5 Celsius goal to stay alive, and that the Pacific's view on this is it's not negotiable because the Pacific are on the front lines and living with climate change impacts daily. Everything that is negotiated across the 13 priorities of the Pacific is really underpinned by this 1.5 to stay alive goal for the Pacific. The second priority for the Pacific headline messaging is that the new collective quantified goal, the NCQG, has to deliver. It has to deliver more accessible, simplified, and new and additional finance to meet the needs of Pacific small island states. The third headline message for the Pacific is the special circumstances of SIDS. And the special circumstances of SIDS is enshrined in the Paris Agreement, and that has to be protected. Now, there are parties who are also arguing their special circumstances. And the Pacific will not move from that. They will not compromise on that, and the fight still continues to protect these special circumstances. And then, there is enhanced transparency. There has to be transparency for implementation, for access to finance, and for accountability, global accountability. What their plans are, what the Global North plans are, there are nationally determined contributions to contribute to keeping global warming down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In the last COP, the disappointment for the Pacific was, whilst there was reference in the final text to fossil fuels, the language wasn't as strong as the Pacific was calling for. And that was the greatest disappointment at the end of COP28. And so the Pacific is calling again for language in the advance of phasing out fossil fuels and strengthening mitigation actions.
A Samoa Niuean storyteller and music composer is undertaking a mission across 7 Pacific islands to research indigenous sound-producing instruments unique to each island. Tau Iliili Alpha Mayava says he's determined to understand why some instruments are still in use while others have been deserted. Tau Iliili hopes his research will help revive the forgotten instruments. He spoke with Grace Viva'ai.
What countries did you visit and the instruments you documented?
We visited Samoa, Fiji, Niue, Tonga, the Cook Islands, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. And I wanted to honor the man in Vanuatu who is now currently the only living knowledge holder. Vanuatu was the only island where we found a knowledge holder that had a deep knowledge of over 13 instruments. Actually, almost everyone we met with the last of their kind in their islands, which is the sad part, and which is why we needed to document them so that if they do pass on to become ancestors, that our instruments don't end with them. And I always thought one of the things that we always take with us, which is what our ancestors brought with them when they came into Aotearoa, was our stories and our sounds, our singings and mythology. And these are in particular to us. There's also legendary stories around the world. But this is what we brought here because it doesn't need a luggage. It comes with our memories of how we were raised. And so I started thinking, what can I leave my children so that it would be, we have a saying in Samoa, it's the oar of the canoe that balances the canoe, so that as they grow up, there will always be something for them to latch onto.
So what is Instruments of the Moana?
So the Instruments of the Moana is the first of its kind. This film, which is in 8 parts, is the first time that 8 of our instruments, and by the way, we have more than 8, but the 8 was the represents the instruments that I could sort of gather more of our islands represented in. And these instruments were pretty much the soundscape of our, the background sound. Nowadays, when you go to the islands, you hear the sound of a chicken and a dog barking at 4 o'clock in the morning. But back then, along those sounds were sounds of the nose flutes, were sounds of the stamping tube. We are also aware of the lali and the pate.
Looking ahead to the future, what do you hope this document will leave for the younger generations?
Hopefully, there are two ways of looking at this. It's either I would be the one to continue this journey, or maybe we leave room for the next smartest person, much smarter than me, that's coming along, that will probably take this up as a base to then evolve the search into other instruments, right? But at least there's something they can use today. All right, I'm going to start from where he left off, and I'm going to take it up to this level. So that's the whole idea.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.